You know that feeling when you're in a relationship that feels like a nonstop emotional roller coaster? One minute, you're just on top of the world, feeling amazing, and the next, you're completely crushed. It's so dizzying, so confusing, and the weirdest part, it can make you feel absolutely, totally hooked on that person. Right? Does it sometimes feel like a real addiction? Like logically, you know this person is causing you pain, but emotionally, you just can't bring yourself to walk away. If that sounds even remotely familiar, I need you to hear this loud and clear. You are not crazy, and you're definitely not weak. What you're likely experiencing is an incredibly powerful psychological tool, and it has a name: intermittent reinforcement. So today, we're going to break down exactly how this thing works and how it completely hijacks your brain. All right, so before we get into the how and the why, let's just put a really clear label on what we're talking about. What exactly is this emotional roller coaster? Okay, so in a relationship, intermittent reinforcement is this pattern where you get cruel or just cold, distant treatment, but it's mixed in with these sudden, unpredictable moments of affection and reward. And that word, unpredictable, that's the key. It's the chaos of not knowing what you're going to get that makes it so powerful. So let's pull back the curtain and get into the science of it all. Why is this pattern so incredibly good at getting people hooked and keeping them there? Well, believe it or not, it actually all goes back to these famous experiments by the psychologist B.F. Skinner. He put rats in a box with a lever, and when the rats pressed the lever, they'd sometimes get a little pellet of food. But here's where it gets really interesting. So Skinner found something wild. The rats that got a food pellet every single time they pressed the lever, well, if the pellet stopped coming, they just gave up pretty quickly. But the other rats, the ones who got pellets randomly, unpredictably, they became completely obsessed. They would just keep pressing that lever over and over and over again. It was that hope, that powerful, addictive feeling of maybe this time, that kept them glued to that lever. And this whole thing creates a literal neurochemical storm inside your brain. When things are good, you get this huge rush of dopamine and oxytocin, those feel-good bonding chemicals. Then, when things turn cold, your system gets flooded with stress hormones like cortisol. But here's the kicker. When they're finally kind to you again, the relief you feel triggers a dopamine surge that's even more intense than the first high. That's the chemical hook that pulls you right back in. So get this. When someone says they feel addicted to a person, they're not just being dramatic. It's not a metaphor. Brain imaging studies from biological anthropologist Helen Fisher proved it. This hot and cold cycle lights up the very same reward pathways in your brain as a cocaine addiction. It is, chemically speaking, an addiction. So what does this look like in a real relationship? Well, it usually follows a pretty predictable three-stage cycle. And once you learn to see these stages, the whole pattern becomes impossible to unsee. This cycle that gets you hooked usually unfolds in three parts. First, there's the hook, also known as the idealization phase. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, comes the switch, which is devaluation. And that painful stage leads right into the craving, which is where the cycle locks itself in place. Okay, stage one is all about love bombing. It's this overwhelming tidal wave of attention and affection that's designed to get you hooked fast. It feels absolutely incredible, but it's usually way over the top. We're talking huge promises about the future after just a few dates, or hearing "you're my soulmate" almost immediately. This phase is what creates that intense chemical high that your brain is going to end up chasing later on. And then the switch flips. The person who just worshipped you is suddenly critical, cold, distant. They might ignore you for days, the silent treatment, or start gaslighting you, which is when they manipulate you into questioning your own sanity. This sudden shift is so jarring and painful, and it's meant to trigger that stress response, leaving you completely desperate to figure out what you did wrong. And that desperation leads right into the final stage. Just when you feel like you can't take it anymore, they'll throw you a crumb. A tiny bit of affection, a brief apology, a glimpse of the person you first met. And that's not a real change. It's the unpredictable reward. It stops the pain, gives you that huge dopamine hit of relief, and just like that, you're locked right back into the cycle. You see, over time, this intense cycle doesn't build real love. It forges something totally different, a powerful, confusing psychological chain known as a trauma bond. So a trauma bond is that really intense, bewildering attachment you can feel for somebody who is actively hurting you. And it is so important to understand this. It is not love. It's not a sign of your character or some kind of flaw. It is a conditioned survival response, hardwired into your brain by this exact cycle of abuse and unpredictable kindness. Actually, back in the 90s, research by psychologists Dutton and Painter pinpointed the two things you need to create a trauma bond. First, a power imbalance in the relationship. And second, you guessed it, that cycle of intermittent good and bad treatment. When you have those two ingredients, this incredibly strong, hard-to-break bond is pretty much the inevitable result. And if any of this is ringing true for you, I promise you are so far from being alone. It's estimated that a staggering 158 million people in the US alone are affected by narcissistic abuse, which is a type of relationship where this dynamic is extremely common. The scale of this is just massive. But listen, this is the most important part of this whole conversation. Understanding the trap is the very first step to dismantling it. You can break free from this. Recovery is 100% possible. So, how do you do it? Well, the path forward usually involves a few key steps. It all starts with just recognizing the pattern for what it is. It's a manipulation tactic, not some complicated form of love. The next, and often hardest step, is going no contact, if you can, to actually break the chemical cycle. Seeking out a therapist who understands trauma and reconnecting with your support system, your friends and family, is so crucial. And last, but maybe most importantly, you have to practice self-compassion. That shame and self-blame you might be feeling, that's actually a part of the abuse. As experts like Dr. Ramani always say, healing isn't about blaming yourself for getting tricked. It's about finally understanding that your brain's own reward system was literally weaponized against you. This wasn't your fault. And I want you to really remember this. A healthy, real relationship feels like a safe harbor, not a Category 5 hurricane. It's built on consistency and respect. It doesn't make you feel addicted or insane. It makes you feel safe and secure. You absolutely deserve that consistency. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The true opposite of this chaotic cycle isn't some fairy tale of nonstop bliss. It's stability. It's that quiet peace that comes from knowing where you stand with someone. So just take a second and really ask yourself, what would a relationship built on genuine safety instead of manufactured chaos actually look and feel like for you?